The White House has confirmed tariffs are coming for Canada and Mexico, and nothing can be done to stop them, according to U.S. President Donald Trump. Trump has just spoken from the Oval Office. We're waiting for that video to come into our newsroom. But speaking earlier today, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Trump will implement the 25% duties tomorrow.
The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China.
The president and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Candace Laing, who is kind enough to join us now in this breaking news environment. Candace Laing, I know it's impossible to react with total certainty, but based on the threats being reinforced by the press secretary and by the president himself, 10% on oil and gas, presumably 25% on everything else. I mean, what does this mean for Canadian business?
Well, thanks for having me. When it's a breaking news day and everyone is just trying to, I think, hold it together, it's just an incredibly torturous time, I think, for all of us, not just business, but all Canadians. But I think where we've been really focused through all this, whether the gloves are coming off tomorrow, today, we're in this for the long haul, because I think what we know with the tariffs is, whether they're used as a big stick for non-trade related concessions, there's a broader agenda here to really reshape many relationships. And of course, we're very concerned about our own with the U.S. and this broader plan to really shift business south of the border and what that means for us.
Yeah, we just got another bulletin on the wire. Donald Trump says tariffs may cause short-term disruption. I think that is an understatement from the president there. But, Candace Laing, as we look at this, some of the data I've seen, the analysis is that there's about 2.4 million jobs in the Canadian economy that are considered to be trade exposed. This is analysis done by Trevor Toome at the University of Calgary. 6% of all jobs in Canada, and those are pretty much split evenly between companies that export and then their suppliers and service providers. The order of magnitude of what the president calls a short-term disruption for those workers. We've seen projections of a 2008, 2009 style recession, maybe unemployment rate as high as 10%. I mean, is that what you're expecting at the Chamber? I know you've done your own analysis there.
Yes, we've modeled this, and in a full, 25% tariff retaliatory measures taken scenario. I mean, Canada is looking at, being in a recession by mid-year. Now, having said that, and your comments about what just came out, I think the thing that gives me a bit of, I guess, relief or hope is that, we know what tariffs do to the economy on both sides of the border. But when you really look at the amount of our exports to the U.S. that are actually inputs to their manufacturing, you mentioned the jobs on our side of the border. Over 1.4 million jobs are supported from our trade and the business we do every day in the United States. And if the agenda here really is to redomicile some of those businesses in the manufacturing, that in fact is going to take time, which is why we are doubling down in this moment on leveraging that time starting yesterday on what we have to focus internally to strengthen our position. And we think it's absolutely the right time to address our own internal tariff-like barriers on internal trade.
Well, there's some more developments, and I apologize for springing this on you in real time, but we're all learning this together, Candace Laing. Donald Trump says he's not worried about the market reaction to his tariffs. This is a lot of people thought he's very worried about the stock market reaction as when it's up, it's a sign of the strength of the economy. But he also says we'll be doing something very substantial on tariffs with the European Union. So this suggests that this is really a broader agenda to rebalance global trade, and his belief that Western democracies in particular have taken advantage of the U.S. economic might, and the liberalization of trade has led to manufacturing jobs and other industries flourishing in countries outside of the United States. And if we presume that Howard Lutnick was speaking the truth the other day as his confirmation hearing, this is about getting those industries back. He suggested this about pharmaceuticals. We know a lot of those are made in Europe. But the idea that it's not just a Canada-Mexico thing, this is Europe, this turns into a global economic challenge now, not just a continental one.
Yeah, I think that agenda has been brewing and dripping out over the last while. But I think, and we know, I think there's A lot we disagree with on Trump's positioning around trade deficits and how he sees that, and even some of the false narratives we believe he puts out there about those trade relationships. But I think it goes deep into the lack of understanding how integrated supply chains are within all those trade relationships. And in fact, I think what will be very interesting, although unfortunately probably the painful way to go about this, is that the American economy and American workers and people will have to experience, what it takes to now unwind those integrated and efficient supply chains that actually support manufacturing within the United States. And that, depending on which sector and supply chain you take, they are complex, and they are built that way because they work well for business today.
Candace Laing, this is a final point. The government is watching this in real time too and trying to figure out how to respond and to calibrate a response in such a way that it hits back in a way that Americans feel the pain in politically sensitive areas to maybe put pressure on the president, but without, compounding the misery of Canadian businesses and Canadian citizens and workers. I mean, what would your advice to Justin Trudeau and the people advising him and the premiers be in terms of what we're hearing from the president in this last little while?
Yeah, I think as we've talked about, we want to avoid tariffs and an escalation at all costs. But if we need to respond, that work is being done. And I think measured, calculated, surgical, precise to be strategically oriented with the impact we want to have, that is best. And then I think more broadly, when we look at, the fiscal policy, maybe bracing for the impact and supporting businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses that can absorb such shock and impact, it's important to be timely, very targeted, and, try to make sure that we are looking at temporary measures and that we don't actually lock ourselves in to fiscal costs, and because we have to be measured in our response on that front as well. So timely, targeted, and temporary.
Candace Laing, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Well, if you're just joining us, this is a special extended edition of Power and Politics responding to escalated threats from the U.S. president. The tariffs are coming tomorrow and by February 18th on Canada's oil and gas sector, 25% on everything. Tomorrow is the latest we have from the White House, 10% on oil and gas by the 18th of February is what we're seeing on the wires. We will have tape of Donald Trump soon, and we will bring that to you the minute it is available in its entirety. So, Rosie, since we started, our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Brown, by the way, she's here
Don't
with
worry
me.
about that today.
She's always here. Look, since we started, it was Canada, it was oil and gas. Now it's the European Union. Yep. Donald Trump is talking about. This is not just a continental thing. This is a larger global tariff as a cudgel agenda.
Yeah, as a cudgel, but also I think, and you've been talking about this as an attempt to return the American economy to previous glory that it had when manufacturing was based in the United States before so much of it was offshored to China. That is fundamentally what this is about. It's about trying to get industry and manufacturing back into the United States and create more jobs and opportunity for the U.S. The European Union piece is interesting to me because it does then, I think, open up some possibility of bigger allies for Canada, right? We have a free trade agreement with the European Union. What then could we do if we align ourselves with allies to take this on? I'm not saying it's going to blunt what is about to happen to us. Certainly, it will be damaging. But if you can find someone that you can sit beside and stand up to the president, I think that there's an interesting position there for me. But it also shows that to his point that we will hear eventually when he speaks, is that there is nothing we can do. If there is no negotiating tactic, well, then what are we willing to do? And who can we align ourselves with in order to make sure that this has as little effect as possible, or in order to reshape our economy entirely as well, so we are no longer dependent on the United States the way we are. I mean, this is, I would imagine, devastating for the people that were behind NAFTA, the first NAFTA, and behind the renegotiation of CUSMA, which really was supposed to further entwine these relationships that people believe are so important. And the president is indicating that they no longer are.
Right. I'm also curious to see some of the Canadians who stood up and cheered on Donald Trump, how they're feeling in the wake of this today. Okay, look, if this is part of a plan to move manufacturing inside the U.S. border, then people like Drew Dilkens are obviously very worried about that. He's the mayor of Windsor, Ontario, and also the chair of the new Border Mayor's Allowance. Drew Dilkens, more than $300 million of goods cross that bridge right there, the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, every single day. What's your reaction to these latest bulletins coming out of the White House?
My grandmother once said, "Don't get stressed about the things you can't control." And this seems to be a moving target. Of course, we're getting very close to February the 1st, so there's a lot of concern about what may or may not happen. But I think we just need to see at this particular point in time, we need to be ready. We need to be ready in a very deliberate way, in a strategic way, in a very surgical way to apply pressure back on the pain points that we have and the leverage that we have in certain industries. And I think, my own city, David, you talked about the amount of trade. We're home to the busiest commercial border crossing between the U.S. and Canada with the Ambassador Bridge. A full 25% of that trade crosses here each and every day. And of course, the auto industries on both sides of the border, whether it's Windsor being the auto capital of Canada or Detroit being the motor city, we know the tight integration of the supply chains, and that anything that Donald Trump does in the nature of 10% or 25% will have an immediate impact on my community, but also the folks in Detroit as well.
It's always good to follow your grandmother's advice and not get stressed about things you can't control. But I don't. How you doing with that? I mean, this seems fairly stressful because the stakes are just enormous.
Oh, listen, 25% tariff could be catastrophic in many cases if it went on for any period of time. And so, the Border Mayors Alliance, what we've done is try and link mayors in border cities like mine from coast to coast, so all the way out in Surrey, all the way out to New Brunswick with many stops in between, because we know communities like ours are going to be hit first. We're going to be hit the hardest, and there's going to be an immediate impact here that will be felt in our community, but it's also going to be felt in the United States. So the Border Mayors Alliance is about connecting us in our own country, but then being able to reach across the border to the mayor of Detroit, in my case, and other mayors in surrounding areas to say, guys, we really got to be singing from the same song sheet here and be part of the same chorus, because the impact in our communities, although it seems to be aimed at Canada, it's going to be devastating for all of our communities because of the integration of the supply chains. And so that's the work that we're doing. We want to feed into the national dialogue and discussion that's going on and be ready to be activated at a moment's notice.
Your American counterparts get that, though, right? I mean, we have talked before about the healthcare workers who go across the bridge every day or through the tunnel every day to work in the health system, in Detroit and throughout Michigan. They must know the effect all of this would have. I mean, why do you think that message is, if it's making it to the White House, it's just being ignored by the White House at this point?
I think there's still a sense that folks are trying to figure out what the end goal is. They're being careful not to cross the president in any material way in the early days here. They want to see what the goal is. And we're not sure. I mean, this started off as a goal to right-size trade. Then it switched to border security and drugs, where we have a shared interest, I think, between the United States and Canada, wanting to control those things. And it seems to be a moving target. And so as long as it's a moving target, we're not going to be able to get to the bottom of it. If it's about an early renegotiation of the former NAFTA, CUSMA, then let's get to the table and figure out what the friction points are and move forward. But at this point in time, it just seems to be a moving target. No one's quite sure where this is going to land or when it will land. And at the end of the day, we're just going to have to be prepared to deal with what comes our way, and we will be prepared.
All right, look, I agree. It is a moving target, and it's impossible to say things with absolute precision and uncertainty. So, but I have to ask you about the latest thing he said, right? Because on the wires right now, Mr. Mayor, is Trump saying nothing can be done by China, Mexico, and Canada to forestall tariffs. We have big deficits, and tariffs are something we're doing. We may increase those tariffs, and we are not looking for concessions. I mean, what does that say to you about the ability of people acting in good faith in this country to try to avoid this hit?
Well, I've taken a few economics courses in my time, and I think if one looked back in history about the effects of trade or tariffs rather on trade and on the impact on the United States as an example, you'll find that it'll stand to increase the dollar. And the United States, just like Canada, is a trading nation. And so the higher their dollar goes, the less attractive their goods are to be purchased from other places around the world. less attractive it will be to purchase for Canada to purchase their goods. And so I think to your earlier point just before I came on, David, I think you're going to have, if this goes on for any length of time, you will start getting a rewiring of supply chains where Canada will start looking more closely at what options we have in Europe and in other parts of the world to make sure that we can still sell our goods and keep our economy going.
The acute vulnerability of the Canadian economy is on full display, right, in this moment when you talk about what he is trying to do, presumably, and the way he is trying to do it. I mean, what do you think the federal government can do? What do you think the response should be? And we just heard from Candace Laing, who said, targeted and time-limited tariffs. What do you think the calibration should be when the Prime Minister and the government does eventually respond to whatever Donald Trump does?
Well, I agree that these supports are going to be absolutely mandatory, especially if we're talking about 25% tariffs. And one asked me not too long ago what it would mean. And I said, I think this could be of the magnitude of what you've seen in terms of COVID relief if this went on for any period of time. But I would suggest that we really need to work to get clarity on what the ultimate objective is here by the president, and then find out what the off-ramps are. At the end of the day, we don't want to get into a position where, he feels obliged to keep this going just because he made a pronunciation at a microphone once or twice. Let's figure out what those off-ramps are. Let's hope it doesn't happen in the first place and try and do all we can. And I think folks have been doing that. But to the extent it does happen, what are the off-ramps that we can take, that he can take, where we can all move forward and find a pathway that allows us to continue developing and building our economies together?
What if the off-ramps, this is a final point, Drew Dilkens, are the catastrophic outcomes that the president himself has said, that we don't need Canadian cars? They can all move to Michigan. Those factories can be south of the border. I mean, for your town and for all the towns around Windsor, your city, sorry, that's devastation. I mean, what if that is the end goal and he's prepared to fight all the way for it for 4 years?
I think just the nature of the integration of the supply chains, it would take a long time for folks to be able to move entire supply chains and operations to the other side of the border. I just think it's so impractical that at the end of the day, even if he does that, he's just going to increase the value of his own dollar, which is going to have a negative impact on all of the other trade that they hope to do around the world. And so I think simple math here might make a sensible person make a right decision. And I like to think that in the former renegotiation of NAFTA, the president was making strong pronunciations at the microphone, but the level 2 and the level 3 folks who really had to get the rubber, make the rubber hit the road, were smart and sensible and actually found pathways and understood what the implications were of what they were doing. And so let's hope that that's the case this time around as well, that the president needs to make some move because he's locked in a position, but let's hope smart people are doing smart things behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's a different presidency and a different administration this time, and a lot of those people just aren't there. But yes, it's good to have hope. Drew Dilkens, Mayor of Windsor, Ontario, thank you for joining us. I think we're going to speak a lot in the weeks ahead. Thanks for being here, sir.
Thanks, David.